Chapter 23, Zum City. Zum City derived its name from the late Xian Zum Daikun's middle name and served as the Principality of Xi'an's capital, its military, political, and administrative center. The port sector of the giant sealed cylinder colony held the Secret Service branch offices, whose personnel worked hand in hand with the customs and immigration authorities. Looking out a giant window in his office, Lieutenant Ramba Ral could clearly see Mahar 180 kilometers in the distance. The work shifts on the immigration check were not scheduled to change yet, but he had put a stop to inspections of embarking passengers 2 hours earlier. He and the dozen men in his command all knew Mahar was about to fire, and they watched and waited with bated breath. "It's time." Before Ramba Ral finished his sentence, an enormous flare of light burst out of the end of the distant cylinder. The entire colony, 6 kilometers wide and 30 kilometers long, had been turned into a giant laser cannon, but the flare had come from the residual matter in the cylinder that had incinerated on ignition. The actual laser beam itself was invisible. Nonetheless, despite a 5-layer window with built-in filters, Ramba and his men were overwhelmed by the intensity of light. One of the younger men exclaimed nervously, "If that thing were aimed at the moon, it'd blow it out of the sky. And that's not even at full power," another marveled. "The Federation attack on Abawa Ku is proceeding too fast," Ramba calmly said. "That's why they had to use it." Then the vid phone next to him rang, and he grabbed the receiver. "This is the Communications Division of the 58th Battalion on the System Project. Admiral Chapman Jiram has a message for you and your men in the SS. The second blast will take place 20 minutes from now. Until it is over, you are ordered to stop any and all ships leaving Zum City." "Instructions understood," Ramba replied. The men around him who overheard the interchange suddenly began whispering among themselves. "That was a test. They say the next blast's for real. That means the war's over, right? 20 minutes from now." Ramba pressed a button to lower the shutters on the outside wall of windows turned around, and strolled over to pick up a coffee tube from a machine in the corner of the room. So this is what the Supreme Commander meant by settling this thing once and for all, he thought. He could understand Jiren's mindset, but at the same time he worried about Crowley. He knew the first blast had missed her, but there was a strong possibility the second would not. The real question was how Caecilia would interpret and react to whatever information Crowley had brought her. Her life's hanging in the balance, he concluded, unless she can get away from the front lines or unless Revel changes his strategy. Ramba rarely thought about the fact that Giranzabi might be suspicious of Crowley's activities. He knew it was possible, but never lost any sleep over it, and as for himself, ultimately, his integrity and fatalistic attitude formed a veil that even Giran's secretary, Cecilia Irene, was unable to see through. He was the type of man who served his master loyally no matter what, and it was not a charade. He simply had no idea that the little seed he had planted in Crowley's mind might eventually cause Giran's death. Crowley Heyman was already working on another, more independent level, as voices echoed through the Zum City Unified Command Operations Room during the technical check. Giranzabi found he enjoyed watching the tension building on the faces of those around him. Pictures from observation satellites already indicated the test blast had achieved everything he had hoped for. The Mahar colony cylinder, in its new role as a laser oscillator, had performed exactly as designed. Only half the energy supplied by the solar batteries installed in the area around the colony had been used. It would not even be necessary to wait another 20 minutes for the next blast. Suddenly, a terminal in front of Giran indicated a problem, and several technicians dashed up and gathered before it. "What's this?" he demanded. 2 faulty microcircuits? He knew any equipment put in place so rapidly was likely to develop some problems. They were also in an area that was not entirely devoid of Minovsky particles, and there was bound to be some interference. But at least the effectiveness of the system had been proved. The Federation Armada was part of Earth's last-ditch effort, and if the Armada could be annihilated, it would inevitably mean the defeat of the Earth Federation. And if in the process of ending the war, he could also eliminate his sister on Abawa Ku, it would be like bagging 2 birds with 1 stone. Captain Hasibi of the Engineers Corps was standing in front of him with his back turned. "Well, Captain?" Jiren casually asked. Hasebi spun around and said in a strained voice, "We can do the job at 78% of power, Excellency. But the surviving Federation forces seem to be regrouping slowly, sir. I think it's still too early to fire again." Jiren turned to a general staff officer standing behind him to his left. "Do you agree?" he asked. "Yes," the officer replied. "The forces under Vice Admiral Randolph Weigelman's command, and also those of Her Excellency Kaisilia Zabi, are gradually closing in on the enemy, sir. If we fired the cannon now, the losses to our own forces would be enormous. I suggest that using it right now is out of the question, but I think we might win anyway." "Don't ever use the word might in front of me, officer," Jiren suddenly threatened. "Yes, sir. Beg your pardon, Excellency." The man nervously apologized. "You don't think we should just sit back and watch, do you?" "No, sir. Not at all, sir." "Good," Jiren replied calmly. He had just decided to wait another 2 or 3 minutes before making his final decision when one of his aides in the room announced, "Admiral Chapman Jerum's on the hotline, sir." Hopefully, Jiren thought, Chapman was not going to create a problem. The man was starting to grate on his nerves. The console in front of him was reserved for the commanding officer of the operations center, and it had a special box built into it with a secure communications line for confidential conversations. He lifted the lid on the box and took out a bright red receiver, whereupon an image appeared on the display directly above it, showing Chapman standing at attention holding a similar receiver. "In 10 minutes we'll be ready for the second blast, Excellency. We await your decision on timing and the, final target." Chapman's voice was low and restrained, as if he were afraid someone would overhear him. Jiren wished he were more forthright. "I've decided to wait a few minutes and see how things develop, Chapman. But there'll be no change in the final target. As soon as we fire up the laser cannon, we'll also start strafing on the Zig line as planned." "Yes, sir," Chapman answered, saluting. "We'll say it was an accident. Understand, Chapman? An accident. I'll let you know as soon as I decide." But the feeling was not mutual. Jiren loathed signs of weakness among his men. He looked up at the giant overhead operations display on which they relied so heavily. It was not radar-based, and was only a computer simulation generated from unreliable laser sensor readings. He thought. "And they believe in this junk." An official-sounding voice echoed from the operations room's speakers. 5 minutes left until the second firing. Countdown now commencing. "Good," Jiren grunted, reaching again for the hotline receiver to contact Chapman and inform him of his decision. Then he heard a shout behind him and turned around. "The Federation forces have what?" an excited officer was exclaiming. "What's going on?" Jiren demanded. "There seems to have been a change, Excellency." "Are you sure?" "We're double-checking right now, sir. There had been no change in the operations display. It took time for information from laser sensors to be analyzed and extrapolated, and physical interference from Minovsky particles blocked and distorted much of the data that did arrive." Countdown stopped, countdown on hold, ignition on standby. Jiren put the hotline receiver back in its box and closed the lid. Then he spun his chair around to better see what was going on in the center of the operations room. On a special holoscope monitor that generated a 3D image with coordinate lines for reference, computer data from a dozen regular terminals throughout the room was being collected and displayed. As he watched, scores of red and green lights used to differentiate friendly from enemy craft began to wink on and off. "It does appear, Excellency," one of the staff officers announced, "that the Federation forces are detouring to get around to the other side of Abawa Ku. There's an 82% probability they're using it as a shield." It was a mystery to Jiren how anyone in his right mind could put so much faith in numerical projections. Those who trusted that sophisticated form of speculation, he concluded, were idiots. They lacked, he reminded himself, the very quality he so prided himself on, an acute sensitivity to the complexity of the issues at hand. And that thought helped him make his decision. Jiren waited a second and then spoke. "Lieutenant, this is your Supreme Commander. I want you to be ready to leave immediately for Mahar. Wait in the port area until I give you your next orders." Yes, sir. Ramba's eager response made Giran feel mild disgust. The man was destined to spend the rest of his life in a pathetic attempt to make amends for the fact that his father, Jim Baral, had fled the Zeon with the children of Zeon Zum Daikun. From the moment the solar ray system had reached maximum power for the second blast, the staff officers in the operations room had held their breath in anticipation. They knew the Federation fleet was being targeted, but none of them knew what Giran had just secretly ordered Chapman to do. 30 seconds remaining. 27, 25, 23. To Giran's surprise, the final countdown was performed with the computer-simulated voice of an attractive young woman. Someone, probably Chapman, had apparently decided a female voice would register better on his ears. It was a nice touch, but it irritated him. It made him think that his men were trying too hard to please him, perhaps out of fear. He shut his eyes and contemplated a more serious matter. Don't worry, Cecilia, he thought. When the solar ray cannon hits a Baoaku, you won't feel a thing. Even if you're in the most sheltered, protected part of the fortress, the whole process will only take a few seconds. Then you'll rest in peace. The real problem will be what to do with our father, the Sovereign. The countdown continued. 3, 2, 1. Filters were activated on all monitors in the room linked to Mahar. And then the laser cannon fired with a whoosh. It was clearly a more powerful blast than the first one. A colossal flare of light suddenly appeared around the opening as an invisible laser beam again split the heavens. The same instant, Chapman, in the Mahar control center on the Guild, turned the switch to ignite 58 thruster rockets on the top side of the colony cylinder. Firejets 98 to 156. Number 98 is fired. 100 through 110 have fired. 110 through 20 have fired. In Zum City, in the background on his secure hotline monitor, Giran could hear the personnel in charge of adjusting the Mahar firing angle relay their commands throughout the center, linking up the system. Chapman, after his orders had been conveyed, looked ashen. Only a few men in his command were capable of understanding the basic operation of the laser cannon and its retargeting mechanism, and most had no time to question what they were doing. Those who had doubts probably were too tense to vocalize them, or so stunned by the magnitude of the giant flare of light that they never even noticed the correction in the firing angle. The staff in the operations room of the Unified Command at Zum City were the first to detect it, and the cry went up. Change in angle, Mahar now switching to zig line of fire. It was a masterpiece of acting. In reality, it was too late to execute his request, for over 10 seconds had already elapsed since he had hit the switch. The giant colony's inertia was far too great to stop suddenly. The hotline phone in front of Chapman rang. Chapman, this is Giran. What's going on? Mahar's angle of fire is skewed. Are you trying to fry a Baoaku? We're working on the problem, Excellency. The laser oscillation has ceased, but, Chapman answered with as loud and panicked a voice as Giran. In reality, he was overjoyed. The deception had worked. He and Giranzabi were carrying out a little charade that no one else was privy to. He congratulated himself. The Supreme Commander and I are co-conspirators. Giran ordered the hotline phone with Chapman disconnected. He knew the giant laser beam should have incinerated most of the Earth Federation forces and melted the stem of a Baoaku. As far as he was concerned, the operation was over. He next contacted Lieutenant Ramba Ral, about to leave the Zum City port for the Mahar area. Ramba, this is Giran. I want you to proceed directly to the Guild. Someone changed the laser cannon's angle of fire. I want you to find out who's responsible and arrest them. If anyone resists, execute them on the spot. That's an order. Sir? On the monitor, Lieutenant Ramba Ral appeared confused, as did the other officers in the operations room who overheard. Someone shifted the Mahar cylinder so its line of fire included the S sector of a Baoaku. I'm worried about my sister Cecilia. If anything has happened to her, I'm holding Admiral Chapman Jerome personally accountable, even if it was an accident. I want you to deal with him. Do you understand me, Ramba? Yes, sir. Supreme Commander, sir. Without bothering to watch Ramba salute, Giran turned to his aides and ordered, I want a survey done on the level of damage to a Bawaku right away, and the results conveyed to Lieutenant Ramba Ral. He was secretly thrilled. Here he was, impersonating himself in an elaborate charade and doing such an excellent job. I also want to know how extensive the Federation losses are, he added, with just the right tone. We can't be too careful. Then Giran sat back in the upholstered chair provided him and thought, now I'll just wait and see how well my plan really worked. For some reason, he suddenly began thinking of Cecilia and her curvaceous form. Several minutes before the Mahar laser cannon fired its second blast, chaos erupted in the operations room on the Federation Armada's flagship Drog. The Pegasus II had paved the way for the Federation vanguard by weakening the bottom of Abawaku's defense perimeter. And with a little more effort, the lead ships might have been able to smash through and land on the stem of the fortress itself. But now something bizarre was happening. Scouts had detected odd movements in the Zeon defenders, seemingly unrelated to the Federation attack. And the cryptic communication received from Pegasus II was even more puzzling. The graying fleet admirals and staff officers around General Revel argued bitterly over its meaning and whether it meant they should change their strategy. The word from the Pegasus II is that Giran Zabi's planning to eliminate a few of his own forces too. That's preposterous. I want to know where that information comes from. I don't care how fanatical Giran Zabi is. I simply refuse to believe he'd destroy his own crack units. The staff officers debated furiously, knowing the success of the entire campaign depended on their correct interpretation of the situation. They tried to be as rational and objective as possible, but lacking concrete information, they were ultimately reduced to speculating. And since they were staring directly into the maw of death, every minute spent on discussion was a minute squandered. General Revel finally stood up and raised his hands to silence his agitated officers. Gentlemen, he announced, I've given all your opinions careful consideration. Debates have their time and place, but we've wasted precious minutes, and now we need a decision. I've decided we should immediately abandon our position and proceed in the direction the Pegasus II has indicated. Each fleet will continue to fire at the enemy, but reverse course and disperse. After we have avoided the next laser cannon blasts, we can immediately regroup again. This order is effective immediately, and I want it transmitted to all units. On the double. Sir, the communications officer asked, is radio transmission acceptable? Anything, Revel barked angrily. Just get the message out. Immediately. He waited until the man made his way through the cluster of staff officers into the communications console and then ordered the Drog captain, put a Bawaku between us and the sun and immediately reverse course. The Drog bridge sprang to life and the ship's prows started turning around, while the upper and lower deck twin megaparticle cannons maintained a constant barrage on the stem of a Bawaku. The rest of the Armada also began to react as soon as it received its new orders from the flagship. 3 Chibe-class heavy cruisers came up on the Drog's port side, nearly grazing its prow, and joined in an intense barrage. Squadrons of Federation flying Manta fighters plunged into melees with their Zeon Gattle counterparts in front of the ships, and when a nearby GM suit was hit, fragments from the explosion rained on the Drog's bridge. What Revel and his staff officers feared most appeared to be coming true. The Armada was like a giant with legs of clay trying to turn on a dime. Disarray was already appearing in the ranks. With its weaknesses exposed and nearly surrounded by the enemy, the Armada was attempting a maneuver normally considered madness in space warfare. With a worried look, Revel glanced at computer-simulated combat status displays on either side of him. Well, he asked the officer in charge, any sign of Zeon forces breaking through our lines? No, sir. Their rear guard seems to have begun to disperse, sir. I don't know what it means, though. Suddenly, they were interrupted by the communication specialist. Sir, we've intercepted a communication from Zeon. Apparently, an order has gone out for all fleets above the Geldorf line to retreat. The Geldorf line? Can you tell what course they're on? No, sir. Sorry, sir. Revel was puzzled. Why was the Zeon issuing an order to retreat? And why all fleets? There was no evidence they had done so earlier, before the first laser cannon blast had occurred. There was no way he could have known the order was merely Giranzabi's selfie to his own conscience, a too-late attempt to atone for his diabolical plot. "It's odd," he muttered, and then it happened. Thousands of flashes occurred to the rear of both forces, turning the area into chaos, and an enormous ring of light spread out toward the core of the Earth Federation armada. The final image that registered on General Revel's retina was that of the stem portion of Zeon's Abawaku space fortress, turning white-hot and melting. Then his flesh and blood turned into dust and scattered into a jet-black cosmos. In the command center atop the giant Abawaku fortress, Vice Admiral Randolph Weigelman's last words were a scream. "My God, have the men on Mahar lost their minds?" Along with a third of his men, he had survived the initial attack, but after the fortress stem disintegrated, the entire superstructure began to shudder, sending him ricocheting between the floor and ceiling a dozen times, snapping his neck and killing him instantly. Others were killed in the weightless conditions when ordinary machinery and equipment became deadly projectiles. Then Abawaku heaved mightily and exploded, spewing rock and metal fragments into space. The Earth Federation Space Armada had been destroyed. The Principality of Zeon forces had been crippled, for Giranzabi had sacrificed many of his best units and people in a strategically vital final defense outpost. The war, to all appearances, had virtually ended, but reality was not so simple, unknown to Giranzabi. His sister Cecilia had survived the attack on Abawaku and was making a beeline for the Principality of Zeon Heartland and the Swammel, accompanied by 2 heavy and 3 light cruisers. At secondary combat distance, she was also followed by the Pegasus II and a pair of Federation Salamis-class cruisers. The shortest route normally took less than 2 hours, and after seeing what the solar ray laser cannon had done to Abawaku, Cecilia ordered her engineers to wring every ounce of speed possible out of her ship. On the bridge, one of her aides announced, "There seems to be no doubt, Excellency, that the S sector of the fortress was targeted." Like the other officers, he was still incredulous. And, being well aware of his superior's tendency for blind rages, he trembled to think what she might attempt for revenge. Cecilia assembled her crew and addressed them. "I'm asking you to join me on a new and dangerous mission. This is not an order but a request. Those of you who disagree with what I'm about to do are free to leave this ship. I will even provide one of the cruisers for your safe passage. You may surrender to the Federation or, when all is over, return to Zeon. All I ask is that you do not interfere with my plans." The assembled officers and men waited nervously, wondering what she would say next. "I've decided to use whatever force I have at my disposal to destroy the Supreme Commander of the Zeon, Giranzabi. For your information, Commander Shar Aznable has agreed Cecilia to join me. Cue that few I await of her crew would oppose her. Your decision." She had, after all, just saved their lives. If not for her, they would have been roasted in the solar ray blast. And besides, she had the support of Shar Aznable and the 300th Autonomous. While small in number, they were reputed to be the Zeon's most powerful unit of all. After a few moments of deliberation, Captain Forsyth, representing all those assembled on the bridge, stepped up to Cecilia. "Excellency," he said, "the vote is unanimous. Some of us have questions, but we've all decided to cast our lot with you." "Good," she answered. "Just for your information, we also have the Federation Trojan Horse and 2 Salamis cruisers following us. They're on our side." "On our side? You mean they'll help us?" "That's correct, Forsyth." Then one of the younger officers blurted out in disbelief, But why?" "The Earth Federation Space Forces," Cecilia explained, "have for all intents and purposes been destroyed. These surviving ships are virtual orphans in the area, and their only real chance for survival is to follow us to Zeon and surrender. When they realized the horror of what Giranzabi has really done, they decided to join us and try to eliminate him." "But Excellency," the officer continued, apoplectic in his questioning, "how can you be sure? We still don't know exactly what happened. The damage to Abawaku must have been the result of some sort of accident on Mahar. How can you unilaterally conclude we must eliminate the Supreme Commander? Tell me one other thing, though, he added. How did the enemy ship the Trojan horse know what was going on? I don't know myself, Kycilia replied, glancing at Captain Forsyth. As you all know, Commander Char Aznabul's recent battle report was extremely vague. She knew it was possible that Char had been in secret communication with the Federation White Base-class ship all along, but she doubted it. If he had been passing highly detailed information about her plans, she was certain it would have fled the area or turned around and attacked her squadron. She suspected something far more subtle was going on, something beyond her immediate comprehension. Her suspicions had been reinforced earlier, when she had received verification of the Gundam mobile suit's destruction. Right around the same time as Char Aznabul's report had stated that it had occurred, she had mysteriously heard the words "destroy gear" and "greater than." It was almost as if they had suddenly slipped into her mind. At first, she had thought they were a figment of her imagination, but then she had remembered the few times she had heard Char talk about his experiences in battle with new types. She herself knew little about them, and merely assumed they had a slightly more evolved consciousness. But if the pilot of the Gundam were a true new type, and she herself had some of the same potential, then she realized she actually might have received some message from him. It was a tiny revelation, but it had swayed her. I believe, she continued, it has something to do with the fact that they're a new type unit. I think they've joined us because they intuitively know Giran Zabi's an enemy, not just of the Federation, but of all mankind. Even after we just destroyed their Gundam mobile suit, Forsyth asked, still doubting. The Gundam pilot wasn't their only new type, Kycilia snapped, irritated. As far as I can tell, new types aren't supermen but ordinary people with a unique sensitivity or an expanded awareness. People capable of seeing the totality of things. I'm sure there's more than one new type aboard that ship, and I'm sure that's why they've decided to join us. So now they're our comrades in arms? I don't like the sound of comrades, frankly. Think of them as temporary allies. But enough talk. I want all crew members to stay at their posts, but to try and rest. When we approach Zoom City, we'll probably encounter resistance. We'll assume battle formation as soon as we reach the third combat line. Kycilia ended the session with a final exhortation to her troops, her shrill voice echoing throughout the bridge of the Swammel. On the bridge of the Pegasus II, Bright Noah and the core crew members greeted an unusual visitor. We bear you no personal grudge, Commander Char Aznabul, Bright said. If we'd stayed in the area, we would have all been vaporized. It irritated him that he couldn't see the man's eyes clearly behind his protective mask. I am relieved to hear that, Char answered stiffly, especially from the skipper of such a distinguished warship. It's a profound honor for me to be here, and as you know, it's not a mere accident. Frankly, without Amuro Ray, it never would have been possible, and without you and your crew, Amuro Ray would never have been able to develop his potential to the extent that he did. Sayla continued to man the bridge communications console, but she could see and hear everything going on. Only a few steps away from her, standing with impeccable bearing, was her brother, tall and magnificent, with a warm voice, resplendent in his red Zeon military uniform, with his protective mask and platinum-colored helmet. His personal charisma was already helping to put the Pegasus crew at ease. Yet, as she watched him discuss strategies with her skipper, she knew he had changed. He was her brother Kasval Daikun, yet he was also Commander Char Aznabul of the Principality of Zeon military, and the latter persona had by now nearly eclipsed the former. As much as she wanted to get up out of her seat and run to him, she could not. Her brother was a memory treasured by her own other persona, Artesia Daikun, which was also fading within her. Amuro had been right, and his words now helped her stay in control, helped her prepare for the inevitable parting she knew she would again experience. He killed the man I loved, she thought. As she watched, Kai Shiden extended his hand in greeting to Char. I'm the gun cannon pilot, Commander, Kai said, and I'm sorry, but I'm not the forgiving type. Someday you may have to pay a price. I understand. But remember that the situation's changing and that there's a time and place for everything. Right now, all I ask is that you don't shoot me in the back until we get through this mess." Slegger Rowe answered for Kai. "It's a deal, Commander. But after it's all over, we may demand, as they say, satisfaction." "Fine," Shaw replied with a smile at Slegger, Kai, and Bright. "That'll give me something to look forward to. Here's hoping we all survive till then." Then Mirai stepped forward. "If we're going to be allies," she said, "I've got one favor to ask. There's something that still makes me feel uncomfortable around you." "Uncomfortable?" "Yes, that weird mask. Why do you always wear it?" "This thing," Shar said, taken aback. "It's sort of a personal statement, you might say. A trademark." Then, without hesitating, he doffed his helmet, handed it to Slegger, and casually removed the mask. "Sorry to keep wearing it," he said, with a shy grin. "It's just hard to break an old habit." Bright then extended his right hand and said, "Allies, Commander Char Aznable. Allies." Char took his hand and in a soft voice answered, "I want to believe in the communication among people that Amuro believed in. Let's work toward it then, Commander." Char then spotted Sayla and immediately walked over to her. He stopped in front of her and looked straight at her. Sayla stood up. Her brother's arms seemed to be inviting her, ever so subtly. A rush of childhood memories surged through her body, and she embraced him gently. "Artesia," Char said, "can you forgive me? Amuro was young, Casval, and I loved him." Char bent down and looked at her closely, his chin brushing against her blonde hair. "That's all I wanted to know," he said, "because we may never meet again." "I know," she replied, pulling away from him. She was not crying. She simply felt the Artesia persona within her becoming weaker and weaker. "Just try and stay out of trouble," she said. Char chuckled at her subtle humor. "You've grown into quite a woman, sister." Sayla smiled back at him, and then noticed the rest of the crew members staring at them with an embarrassed look like spectators at an intimate interchange. Char turned and spoke to the assembled crew. "Petty Officer First Class Sayla Mass," he said, "or Artesia Daikun is my sister. She's my only sister, and she will always be my sister." He then bent over, kissed Sayla on the cheek, and put his mask back on, and Kasvalrem Daikun once again disappeared behind it. When Lieutenant Ramba Ral arrived on the Battleship Guild, he was accompanied by 30 members of the Zeon Secret Service. He immediately confronted the military men in the Operations Command Center of the System Project. "We have instructions to arrest all those responsible for skewing Mahar's angle of fire," he announced. "Everyone here is a suspect, given further notice." "You can't arrest me, Lieutenant," Chapman said, smiling thinly at the tall young man. "We're still carrying out our own investigation into the cause of the accident." He had been prepared for the fact that some eager beavers from the SS might arrive after the accident, but he felt secure in his own position. After all, he thought, he was protected by none other than the Supreme Commander of the Principality of Zeon, Jiren Zabi. Chapman was naive. An aging officer, he had in effect placed himself in a situation where he could be used and disposed of at whim. With no powerful connections outside his organizational relationship to Jiren Zabi, he had no one to support him in case the relationship soured. Even Ramba Ral was better positioned than Chapman Jiram was. Ramba looked around the room at the assembled men. He knew that in command centers, surveillance cameras normally recorded everything in triplicate, on videotapes and cards, and he ordered them played back. As he suspected, they contained useless noise. He said. "This appears to be the result of more than simple Minovsky interference." Chapman protested indignantly. "Listen, Lieutenant Ramba Ral, isn't it? What makes you think you have the authority to conduct an interrogation of us anyway?" "Admiral, sir, I have been directly ordered to do so by His Excellency, Supreme Commander Jiren Zabi." "You what?" Instinctively, Chapman knew he was doomed. Lieutenant Ramba Ral had been sent to destroy him, but I was issued the order from above," he sputtered. "My men here are my witnesses. How dare you accuse me?" Chapman never saw what was coming. Ramba's left hand moved with blinding speed. drawing an old-fashioned automatic pistol from his hip and firing a bullet through the Admiral's forehead, spattering his brains out the other side. Ramba slowly put the gun back in its holster. The mood in the command center turned to ice. "The will of the Supreme Commander has been carried out," he announced to the stunned crowd. "For the time being, the Guild will be under the direct command of the Secret Service. You shall all return to your current posts and await orders." Then he had one of his own men search the Admiral's pockets for the key to unlock the hotline vid phone. After listening to Rambaral's report on the hotline, Giranzabi said, "I'll send a special investigation team out immediately. As soon as they arrive, you can return to your regular duties." Then he hung up and reached for a cup of coffee sitting on a console in front of him. His scheme had worked beautifully. The accident had resulted in heavy losses of Zeon ships, but it was nothing compared to those of the Federation. Their entire armada appeared to have evaporated. The operations room at Zoom City Unified Command Headquarters was suddenly bustling with activity. Military men rushed to check the displays used to monitor each battle zone. And as it became apparent that the Zeon had achieved a resounding victory everywhere, the atmosphere turned party-like. Special food and drinks were delivered to all present. Here and there, curls of smoke rose from officers who had decided to sit back and enjoy a cigarette. Others continued to relay orders to the field, but did so in a relaxed, boisterous mood. Hurry up and contact the remaining Abawa Ku forces. Send scout ships out to monitor Federation supply lines. Tell all fleets from Solomon to demand the surrender of any fleeing Federation ships. Girn turned his back on the clamor. He grumbled. "I wonder what the Jaburo moles are going to say now." Then he turned to the communications officer in the room and in a loud voice ordered, "I want a line to Jaburo kept open round the clock from now on." Then, as his staff officers cheered and saluted, Girn began striding toward the exit of the room. Because of the enthusiastic din, on his way out he missed hearing the shocked voice of another officer monitoring a communications line. "What? You're from the Swammel, you say? You've captured 3 Federation ships, and you want to enter the Zum City port?" The Zum City port was on the shady end of the Mammoth Colony cylinder. The sunny end was used primarily for agriculture and collecting solar energy for internal power requirements. The ships in Kaisilia Zabi's unit, deployed in a circle around the Pegasus II and its consorts, were immediately ordered to stop their engines and wait outside the port module. But they kept them idling and drifted under inertia toward the giant entrance hatches. A special patrol vessel came out to inspect the new arrivals. On the Swammel, an intelligence officer turned to Kaisilia and reported, "There are 7 heavy cruisers in the area, one of which is now in port. A squadron from Mahar will arrive soon." After a moment's hesitation, Kaisilia decided to crush all resistance in Zum City immediately, before Girn could mobilize his forces and before other warships could arrive on the scene. "We'll go with Plan 1, she announced. "We'll force our way in." Then she turned and hurried from the bridge area to the Swammel's hangar, where a red Rick-Dom waited for her, its cockpit hatch open. Slightly behind and to the left of the pilot's seat, she had ordered an auxiliary seat installed. Shar would be the pilot, but despite the personal risk, she had demanded to accompany him. She was determined to exact revenge on Giranzabi herself. As was her custom before battle, Kaisilia unrolled the scarf-like collar around her neck and raised it up over her mouth. "Take it away, Commander," she said in a muffled but confident voice. "Don't worry about me." But I do, Shar thought, knowing Kaisilia was too busy thinking about her brother to sense his true intent. The other mobile suit pilots, including Leroy Gilliam, had positioned their suits on the upper deck of the Swammel and were waiting for Char to launch. Then the hangar doors opened, and the red Rick-Dom slipped into space, signaling the start of the entire operation. "Think we can find him?" Kaisilia asked. "Probably," Shar answered, turning his main engine on full thrust. In his rearview monitor, he saw 3 other Rick-Doms and 3 Zakus follow him off the Swammel's decks. And then from the Pegasus II, he saw the flare of an engine streak out of a hatch into black space and knew it was Kai Scheiden's gun cannon. The 8 suits immediately assumed a formation and plunged toward the Zum City port module. And following them, with flames belching from their main engines, came the newly allied force of 8 Zeon and Federation ships. The Swammel turned its main cannon on the port module and fired once. A white-hot light leapt from the barrel and directly hit the giant exterior hatch doors, piercing 2 layers. The doors suddenly swelled, flashed, and then blew up, spewing metal shrapnel toward the suits and ships, but they continued charging ahead. Kai kept his eyes on the red Rick Dom in front of him. He felt uneasy. He was the only one in the mobile suit formation who knew nothing about Zum City. He just hoped Char would lead them directly to Giran Zabi, wherever he was. When the suits arrived at the colony port, 2 layers of the hatch doors were still intact, so they fired bazooka shells and tried to blow the 3rd wide open. The 4th door they would have to leave intact. Destroying it would cause far too much damage to the inside of the Zum City colony. And while they were working on the hatch doors, the Swammel and the Pegasus II left the other ships to stand guard outside and entered the port area. Zeon ships loyal to Giran Zabi in the Zum City area noticed something odd, but did not immediately realize that a full-scale rebellion was underway, because Caecilia's forces constantly broadcast a cover message on all wavelengths. This is Her Excellency Caecilia Zabi's task force. This is not an insurrection, but an authorized military action. Any resistance will be crushed. This is Her Excellency Caecilia Zabi. Kai was prepared to encounter several Zeon suits on guard inside the port module, and sure enough, while his new comrades busied themselves demolishing the remaining hatch doors, he put 2 out of action. In the meantime, Char's Rick Dom slipped through the hole in the 3rd hatch door and reached the 4th and last. Guards on either side of the door began firing, but Char apparently located the manual lever that opened it, for the top and bottom halves slowly began to recede into the walls. As soon as they had enough clearance, the team of 8 suits dashed into the open space of the Zum City colony, fighting a fierce gale from the escaping air. Behind them, when the doors opened fully, came the Swammel and the Pegasus II. As soon as it cleared, the Swammel immediately broadcast a warning to the port authorities and the Zeon Unified Command Center. This is Her Excellency Caecilia Zabi. You are ordered to close the 4th hatch immediately. We are henceforth occupying Zum City. We intend no harm to civilians. Any resistance will only cause needless suffering to the colony and its inhabitants. Cease all resistance. The mobile suit unit quickly reformed and began descending from the port module toward the area where the government officials maintained their residences. Kai watched on his cockpit monitors as artificially generated clouds streamed by and then, to his astonishment, saw a vast green plain. He knew it was completely man-made, but it was the first Earth-like environment he had seen in months, and he could hardly contain his delight. People lived there. They led normal lives. He thought about something Char had said to the effect that the more artificially generated an environment, the more people deluded themselves into a sense of omnipotence. But he decided it was not true. Even if surrounded by a synthetic world, people tended to live and abide by the basic laws of real nature. He was an example himself, he thought, with a touch of pride. But it was an issue he decided to shelve until later. He had to concentrate on where he was going. The inside walls of the colony, the ground, had gravity generated by centrifugal force, so the middle of the cylinder was in a virtually weightless state. That made it easy to fly even in a machine with a humanoid configuration, but he had to be careful not to use too much power. They were inside one of the largest colony cylinders in the solar system, 30 kilometers wide and 150 kilometers long, but they still had limited room to maneuver. It was 6:30 in the morning, colony time, and certainly the first time any of the colony residents had ever seen a formation of 8 huge mobile suits roaring over their heads. Thousands of civilians, mobilized for the war, were on their way to work, and when they looked up, they must have thought it was either a victory flyby or a sign of something terrible about to happen. "No, not yet," came a nervous reply from Leroy Gilliam. Caecilia, seated next to Char, said, "He's got to be over at the Unified Command Headquarters and check the beam rifle by her side." Following the formation of suits, the Swammel and Pegasus II surged through the cloud cover, carefully maintaining a constant altitude. In the proscribed space of the colony cylinder, Their incongruous appearance alone was enough to discourage resistance. The Swammel was jet black with a beak-like prow and a round tank-like stern. The Pegasus was a brilliant white, almost delicate structure that, true to its name, resembled a Trojan horse. To the colonists, who had never seen suits or ships inside their artificial environment, it must have seemed like apparitions from another world. Giranzabi slipped his hand inside Cecilia Irene's blouse and fondled her ample left breast. But then she suddenly announced, "Sir, your sister Caecilia is coming here." The teacup in his other hand began to shake, and he looked at her in shock. "What?" he choked. "Did you say Caecilia?" "Yes, sir." Giran's fingers went into a spasm and clutched at her breast, but she did not even flinch. She was terrified herself. She had awakened that morning and waited for Giran to return to his residence from the Unified Command headquarters. As usual, they would have a cup of their favorite tea together, and then, while Giran catnapped in his study, she would monitor any emergency messages from headquarters. "I don't know why, sir," Cecilia said nervously, "but I suddenly sensed her voice and felt that she was here. Maybe I'm hallucinating or something." What she did not tell Giran was that she had actually heard a voice, a thought from Caecilia, saying, "I'm going to kill him." Giran finally came to his senses. Ha! Some hallucination. Even Caecilia couldn't pull off a stunt like that. Then, noticing his hand still on Cecilia's breast, he squeezed it even harder. "Please, sir," she said, finally wincing. Then a communications monitor in the room flickered to life, and over an image of panicking staff officers at the Unified Command headquarters, Giran heard an announcement, "Sir, the Zoom port area has just been bombarded by the Swammel. We appear to have an insurrection on our hands." Cecilia had been right. Giran commanded with his most authoritative voice into a microphone, "Keep updating me as more information comes in." Then, leaving the monitor on, he walked back over to Cecilia. She quickly stood up and draped his jacket over his shoulders. He reached out and gently touched her left nipple through her blouse. One of his great strengths was his ability to come to terms quickly with a new situation. "Sorry, Cecilia," he said. Then he added, "I wonder what my horoscope would say now." "I wish I knew," she replied sympathetically. In the background, on the monitor, they could both hear an official-sounding voice. Continuing to relay information, "The fourth hatch door in the port module has been breached. A squadron of mobile suits appears to have entered the colony. We need information on their number." Immediately, Giran left his study and headed for the front door of his residence. "This just shows I made the right decision," he thought. Caecilia couldn't be trusted. That's why I had to get rid of her. Comets with him? Instantly, Giran knew. Shar Aznable, Caecilia, the Federation new types. It could mean only one thing. Now that the Earth Federation forces were on their last legs and the Zeon had badly depleted its military strength, Caecilia had decided to use every means at her disposal to eliminate him in a full-scale coup d'etat. As his limousine sped down the highway at full speed, he thought, "Caecilia, you're worse than I am." In the midst of chaos and confusion, Kai Shiden detected Giran's presence. Just as Amuro Ray had once detected Dozel Zabi's aura, it appeared to Kai as a swirling black psychic mist. "I see it," he exclaimed inside his cockpit. "I see it, just like Amuro said." He almost thought he heard a voice, Amuro's voice, reply calmly, congratulating him. Below him, he could see an unescorted limousine barreling down a 6-lane highway, scattering civilian elect cars on the way to work before it. He fired his retro-rockets and put his gun cannon down on the road 100 meters in front of the limousine, landing on the asphalt with a thud and creating huge cracks in the road. Then the 7 other suits of the combined mobile suit unit landed around him. Together they completely blocked the road. Giran Zabi's driver screamed as he slammed on the brakes of the limousine. Giran craned his neck out the window, saw the suits, and instantly realized he was surrounded. Then he heard the amplified voice of his sister Caecilia emerge from a red Rick Dom to the left. "Supreme Commander Giran Zabi, get out of your elect car." The Rick Dom held a beam bazooka in its right hand, and its sights were trained on his limousine. Directly in front of him was another red suit of slightly different design. The The Red Comet? Garen whispered, shocked. The humiliation of having 8 mobile suits peering down at him was too much to bear. He knew there was no way to escape, but in a rage he opened the right-hand door of the limousine and stepped out. The Rickdom's mono-eye glowered ominously down at him. The suit directly in front, he suddenly realized, was a Federation suit, proudly wearing its scratches and dents the way a seasoned warrior bore his scars. On the main monitor of Kai's gun cannon, the supreme commander of the Principality of Zeon looked like a dwarf. To Kai, somehow everything suddenly seemed anticlimactic, but, he reflected, that was probably the way things were supposed to be. Then the red Rickdom next to him moved its left hand horizontally around to the cockpit hatch. The hatch opened, and Kaecilia Zabi stepped out onto the suit's open palm, carrying a beam rifle. The hand gently lowered her to waist level so she could better confront Garen, but she was still 9 meters off the ground. Behind the curtain of suits, elect cars belonging to the Zeon military and equipped with wire-guided missiles began to collect, but when they saw that their supreme commander was being held hostage at gunpoint, they were forced to simply watch, helpless. Seconds later, several hundred armed soldiers also arrived on the scene from the Unified Command headquarters half a kilometer away, but they too became mere spectators at the standoff. Into the air, fell on top of her. Then it was all. Char's red Rickdom spun around and headed toward the Unified Command headquarters, striding down the asphalt road past Kai's gun cannon. Kai stared at the back of the Rickdom. Then he stared at Kaecilia. Her body lay motionless, trails of purple smoke rising in the air around her from where her beam rifle had scorched the pavement. How easily people die, he thought. In the sky above, the Pegasus II and the Swammel approached with guns trained threateningly on the Unified Command headquarters. Char, in his Rickdom, had arrived on the steps of the building and appeared to be delivering some sort of speech to the troops there, but Kai could not hear what he was saying. Amuro, he thought. This is the way it turned out. Suddenly he realized that he hated Char Aznable. The surf frothed around Sayla's bare feet. It was both white and transparent at the same time, and felt warm. The southern European sun was getting stronger, and soon would bring all the delights of summer. Her blonde hair, wet from the tidal air, rustled against her shoulders. On Zeon, Degwin Zabi had been dethroned. Zeon had reverted to a republic with Prime Minister Darshia Baharo at its helm, and a peace treaty had been concluded with the Earth Federation government. The Pegasus II and its 2 consorts had been seized by Zeon forces, and nearly half the crews had voluntarily taken Zeon citizenship. Char Aznable remained in the Zeon military as a captain, helping in its reconstruction, and he was joined by Bright Noah, Mirai Yashima, and several dozen other members of the Pegasus II crew. Kai Shiden was not among them. He stayed with the Earth Federation forces. Luna II was placed under the jurisdiction of the Zeon Republic, and Frau Bo and her 3 charges lived peacefully thereafter. Only Sayla Mass chose to return to Earth, to the place where she had once lived. When she left, Char had said, "I'm staying here, but I'm not in it just for Zeon, Sayla. It's a lot bigger than that. Amuro was ahead of his time, and my work isn't over yet." On Earth, Sayla began living a normal, uneventful life. As far as she was concerned, her brother, Kazvul Daikun, no longer existed. People in space continued to look down on those who chose to remain in the ravaged environment of Earth and derisively called them moles, but she did not care. She finally felt rested, as if after a long fatigue. It was early summer, the most peaceful and beautiful time in the Mediterranean. She slowly lowered her naked young body into the surf. A wave swelled over her and she was surrounded by indigo blue. Amuro was gone, but he was with her. She began swimming with strong strokes, alone, about the author. Yoshiyuki Tomino is the creator of Gundam, beginning with the first animated television series in 1979 in Japan. Later, he authored numerous novels, using the characters he developed, as well as other film and television projects in the Gundam universe. He lives in Tokyo, Japan. About the Translator. Frederik Schodt is a writer, translator, and interpreter based in San Francisco. A longtime fan of Japanese fantasy, he also likes robots, both imaginary and real. Among the books he has authored are Manga, the world of Japanese comics, and Inside the Robot Kingdom, Japan, Mechatronics, and the Coming Robotopia,